I hid my crush, but the girl gave me signs of sympathy, and here I thought everything would work out, but she was getting married and I ruined their lives. I guess you could say it all started on that chilly autumn afternoon, back when the air had a bite and the leaves fell like confetti. Her name was Emily, and I'd known her since college. She wasn't just beautiful, she had this magnetic pull, the kind of presence that made you forget everyone else in the room. She didn't seem to notice how effortlessly she captured attention, and that's what made her even more intoxicating. We weren't best friends or anything. I was more of a peripheral character in her life, a quiet guy in the corner of her stories. She smiled at me when we crossed paths in the library or at campus events, but I was sure I was just another face to her. To me, though, she was everything. Every laugh she shared with others, every detail of her expressions, became etched into my mind like a song you can't stop humming. Back then, I convinced myself it was harmless. Admiring from a distance felt safer than risking rejection. I told myself I was protecting our friendship, even though friendship was too generous for what we had. But the truth? I was a coward. The years went by, and I stayed in touch. Social media made it easy, too easy. I knew when she graduated, when she landed her first job, when she got her dog, Benny. I liked her posts, left comments here and there, just enough to remind her I existed without overstepping. Then came the announcement. It hit me like a gut punch, a casual photo of her with her boyfriend, captioned with a single word, forever. That was the moment everything shifted. I stared at that photo longer than I'd like to admit, studying his face like he was some puzzle I could solve and dismantle. He looked ordinary. That's what made it worse. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun with questions. What did he have that I didn't? Why him, of all people? I wasn't angry yet, not at him, not at her. I was angry at myself for wasting years in the shadows. The invitation came months later. A crisp, white envelope with my name in calligraphy, like some cruel joke. Join us in celebrating the marriage of Emily and Nathan, it read. I stared at it for hours before finally throwing it across the room. But I didn't throw it away. Something inside me, some dark, simmering thought I didn't want to admit to, told me I needed to go. Not to celebrate, but to see for myself if their so-called forever was as solid as they thought. That's how it all started. I spent the days leading up to the wedding trying to rationalize my decision to attend. It's closure, I told myself, though the word felt hollow. My mind teetered between resignation and something darker, a festering bitterness I couldn't shake. I RSVP'd yes. When I clicked send, I stared at the confirmation screen, my pulse racing as if I'd just committed a crime. The weeks passed in a blur, but my thoughts were razor-sharp. I stalked Emily's social media more obsessively than ever. Wedding prep posts flooded my feed, cake tastings, bridesmaid dress fittings, venue tours. Every picture of her beaming face with him at her side stoked the fire inside me. Nathan. That was his name. Even saying it felt like gravel in my mouth. He wasn't anything special. Brown hair, average build, the kind of guy you wouldn't notice in a crowd. But Emily looked at him like he hung the moon, and that was enough to make me hate him. The day of the wedding came faster than I expected. I rented a suit, made sure my tie was perfectly knotted, and plastered on a smile I didn't feel. When I walked into the church, it felt surreal, like stepping into a movie I didn't want to watch but couldn't look away from. The pews were packed with people I didn't recognize, all of them buzzing with excitement. I sat near the back, out of sight but with a clear view of the altar. Then she walked in. Emily. She was breathtaking in her dress, every bit the vision I'd imagined for years. My chest tightened as she floated down the aisle, arm in arm with her father. I couldn't take my eyes off her, even when I wanted to. And then there was Nathan, standing at the altar with that smug, lovesick grin. He didn't deserve her. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms, but I forced myself to stay calm. The ceremony was a blur of vows and hymns. All I could think about was the way she looked at him, how she said, "I do," with a voice full of promise. It should have been me. At the reception, I kept to myself, nursing a drink and watching from the shadows. Emily flitted around the room, her laugh ringing out like music, her dress flowing like something out of a dream. Nathan was always at her side, the perfect picture of a doting husband. That's when the idea first took root. It wasn't a fully formed plan yet, just a flicker of a thought, * their happiness isn't real. It can't be, *, and if it wasn't real, maybe it wouldn't take much to unravel. I stayed longer than I should have that night, keeping my distance but listening, watching, learning. By the time I left, I had one goal burned into my mind: I was going to break them. The days after the wedding were the hardest. I couldn't stop replaying the ceremony in my mind, the way Emily looked at Nathan, the way everyone celebrated them like they were untouchable. The bitterness churned inside me, growing heavier with every passing day. It wasn't enough to stew in my resentment. I needed to do something. If their happiness was built on a foundation as perfect as everyone claimed, I wanted to find its cracks, and widen them. First, I started small. Social media was my playground. I commented innocuously on her posts, just enough to make my presence known without raising suspicion. A memory from college here, a shared laugh there. Each comment was a way to remind her of who I was, of who I used to be in her life. At first, she responded casually, her replies warm but brief. She didn't know I was planting seeds, stirring just enough nostalgia to make her wonder about the past. Then came the next phase, Nathan. It didn't take long to figure out where he worked, a mid-level marketing firm in the city. His LinkedIn profile was a goldmine, filled with details about his career and connections. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I scoured his profile and his company's website like a detective hunting for clues. I found one. A small but promising lead. One of Nathan's co-workers, a woman named Rachel, had tagged him in several photos from office events. In one picture, they stood closer than seemed appropriate, their smiles a little too intimate for my liking. To most people, it would have looked innocent, but to me, it was an opportunity. I created a fake Instagram account, something subtle, with a believable name and a generic profile picture. From there, I followed Rachel and started commenting on her posts. Nothing obvious, just enough to create a presence. When the time was right, I slid into her DMs. I pretended to be someone who worked at her company's competitor, claiming I'd overheard rumors about Nathan and her closeness at industry events. I kept my tone neutral, like someone just passing along gossip out of concern. It worked better than I expected. Rachel denied everything at first, of course, but her tone wavered. She was defensive, over-explaining how professional their relationship was. I didn't need her to admit anything, I just needed her to feel rattled. Meanwhile, I kept playing the long game with Emily. I sent her a private message one night, under the guise of reminiscing about old times. "I saw your wedding photos," I wrote. "You looked beautiful. Nathan's a lucky guy." Her response came quickly. "Thank you. It was such a magical day." I hesitated before sending my next message. "I always wondered what might have been if I'd told you how I felt back in college. But I'm happy for you, really." It was a calculated risk, and her response didn't disappoint. "Wow, I didn't know you felt that way. Honestly, I never realized. But thank you for saying that. I'm glad we stayed friends." Friends. The word stung, but it was enough to crack open the door just a little further. I wasn't just looking for cracks anymore, I was creating them. Their perfect life was a facade, and I was determined to prove it. Emily's response stayed with me for days. I read it over and over, dissecting every word. She claimed she never realized how I felt, but the tone of her message lingered somewhere between surprise and guilt. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stoke my determination. I kept the messages going, carefully balancing nostalgia and subtle flattery. Emily opened up more than I expected. She told me how busy she was adjusting to married life, how hectic Nathan's work schedule had become. It didn't sound like the fairy tale she projected on social media. Sometimes it feels like we barely see each other, she admitted in one message. But that's just part of life, right? I played my role perfectly, the understanding friend. That must be tough, I replied. But if anyone can make it work, it's you. You're amazing, Emily. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Her gratitude poured through her replies, and I could tell I'd struck a nerve. Meanwhile, I escalated my efforts with Nathan. Through my fake account, I continued to nudge Rachel's insecurities. I planted questions in her mind. Are you sure people at work don't think there's more going on between you two? Or, I heard someone mention your name and Nathan's in a meeting. Rachel's posts started to change. She grew quieter online, her once bubbly captions replaced with vague, guarded updates. Then, one day, I noticed her account was gone, she deleted it entirely. It wasn't just Rachel, though. Nathan's social media presence changed, too. His photos with Emily became less frequent, and when he did post, his captions felt forced, almost offensive. I knew I was making progress. Then, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. Emily messaged me late one night, her words pouring out like a confession. I feel so silly saying this, but sometimes I feel like Nathan's distracted, she wrote. He's been working late a lot, and I can't help but wonder if he's. I don't know. Maybe I'm just overthinking. My heart raced as I read her words. I'd pushed her to this moment, and now she was coming to me, confiding in me. You're not overthinking, I replied carefully. You deserve someone who's present, who makes you feel like you're the center of their world. If Nathan's not doing that, it's not your fault. The floodgates opened. Emily told me about her frustrations, about how Nathan brushed off her concerns and how lonely she'd been feeling. I offered nothing but support, subtly reinforcing the idea that her unhappiness wasn't just a rough patch, it was a sign. By the time we ended the conversation, I could tell she was questioning everything. The cracks were spreading, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel triumphant. They weren't as perfect as everyone believed, and soon, they'd realized just how fragile their foundation really was. Emily's doubts became a steady rhythm in our conversations. Every message she sent carried more weight, her frustration growing, her faith in Nathan crumbling. It was almost too easy. I was the patient ear, the loyal friend, the one who always told her what she wanted, needed, to hear. Sometimes, I don't even know if he hears me, she wrote one night. It's like he's always somewhere else, always preoccupied. My reply was immediate but calculated. You deserve someone who listens, Emily. Someone who really sees you. Don't settle for less. She didn't argue. She didn't even defend him. That was the moment I knew I had her. Meanwhile, I'd been watching Nathan more closely. My fake account hadn't drawn suspicion, and I continued to nudge at Rachel's discomfort in their workplace. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered something unexpected. Nathan had been frequenting a local bar after work. I followed him one evening, keeping my distance as he sat alone at the bar. He wasn't meeting anyone, but the sight of him there, drinking in silence, gave me an idea. I approached the bartender once Nathan left, casually striking up a conversation. Hey, that guy who was just here, he comes in a lot, doesn't he? I asked. The bartender shrugged. Yeah, pretty often. Quiet guy, doesn't talk much. I slipped him a few extra dollars and asked, ever see him with anyone? The bartender hesitated, then shook his head. Not really. Just drinks and leaves. It wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. I took that kernel of truth and twisted it into something else entirely. The next time Emily confided in me, I dropped the seed. Have you ever noticed Nathan pulling away more than usual? Like, maybe there's something, or someone, he's not telling you about. Her response was immediate. What do you mean? Do you know something? I feigned hesitation. I don't want to overstep. It's just. I heard he's been spending time at a bar after work. Alone, I think. But you know how these things start. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Emily didn't reply for hours, but when she did, her words were sharp and clipped. I'm going to talk to him about it. Thank you for telling me. I could almost hear the tension in her voice, the suspicion clawing its way into her mind. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I didn't hear from Emily, and her social media was uncharacteristically still. For a moment, I worried I'd pushed too hard, that she'd seen through my act. But then the message came. You were right, she wrote. He's been hiding things. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. This was it. The breaking point. I offered her sympathy, of course, told her I was there for her no matter what. She poured out her heart to me, admitting that her trust in Nathan was shattered. I played my part perfectly, reminding her how strong she was, how she deserved better. By the end of our conversation, she told me she was considering staying with her parents for a while to clear her head. I encouraged her, knowing that distance would only widen the cracks I'd created. As I closed my laptop that night, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I'd done it, I'd destroyed the image of their perfect life. But now, with Emily turning to me more than ever, I realized I hadn't just torn them apart. I'd tied myself to her, bound by the lies I'd sown. This was what I wanted, wasn't it?